Been to Central America probably about 10 times now, and Guanajuato, Mexico continues to be one of my favorite destinations. This central Mexican city is known for its silver mining history, as well as being central to Mexico's independence movement. The higher elevation of Mexico's central highlands leads to a much more temperate climate here, and includes some of my other favorite cities, including Mexico City, Querétaro, and San Miguel de Allende. Today I'll take you on a quick walk through Guanajuato and show you some of my favorite places to visit in the city. Starting out on the west side of town, right now I'm walking through a small square called Jardin Reforma. The centro of Guanajuato is relatively small, allowing you to walk from here to the main center in about 20 to 30 minutes. However, there are so many cute parks, squares, twisty, windy alleys like the one I'm walking down here. You really need at least 2 to 3 days to fully explore the city, and preferably many more. One thing I love about this town is the picture-perfect scenery and great weather make this a popular tourist destination, but mostly for locals. And while Guanajuato is certainly not unknown to international tourism, the vast majority of visitors that you see in the city are coming from neighboring Mexican cities like the major population centers in León, Querétaro, Mexico City, and Guadalajara. Built into a steep valley, Guanajuato is full of windy streets and small narrow passageways that are delightful to explore. And while there is some amazing Spanish colonial architecture, most of the museums in town are either small or a little morbid, like the Mummy Museum. However, most are worth at least a short visit. A good example here is the Museo Casa Diego Rivera. Most people will have heard of this famous Mexican artist who was twice married to Frida Kahlo and whose murals adorn the walls of the Bella Arte in Mexico City. The museum's claim to fame is being the childhood home of Diego Rivera, who was born here in 1886. The museum doesn't contain many original pieces, but it's intended to showcase how the artist may have lived during the late 19th century. It's probably not necessary to spend more than 30 to 40 minutes in this museum. However, admission is cheap, it does have some interesting architecture, and you're likely to at least learn a few things about one of Mexico's most famous artists. Right now we're walking east from the Diego Rivera Museum towards the university. I'll include a map in the description below so you can reference for all the places I'm showing you. You'll definitely get a lot of walking in this town. Most of the streets are curved, narrow, and steep. Now coming around to the Universidad de Guanajuato, it's a large building. It's starkly different architecture than the rest of the city. It's impossible to miss this building, but it sneaks up on you as you come around the twisty, tight corner on Posita Street. Major university in the state of Guanajuato, the historic campus here is somewhat newer, beginning construction in the 1940s, being completed in the 1950s. If you want to, climb the 133 steps to get a much better view of the city. Right now we're heading east from the university on that same street. To me, this is a perfect example of the streets in Guanajuato. Endlessly interesting buildings, cute, narrow, walkable streets, great architecture, pretty universities and churches, small stores and restaurants to explore on almost every block. Guanajuato is sprinkled with so many beautiful churches. Here just north of the main centro is the Templo de la Compania, a Jesuit church that was built in the late 18th century. This is actually one of the largest churches built by the Spanish colonial empire before Mexico declared independence in the early 19th century. This church has a beautiful interior, 3 large naves. It's definitely worth sticking your head in here as you explore the city. Moving south from the church, that white building coming up here on our right is the first theater that was built in Guanajuato in the 18th century, called the Teatro Principal. A major cultural centerpiece to the city to this day. Unfortunately, nothing was playing while we were there, but check when you're in town, especially during the Cervantino Festival in October. One thing that makes Guanajuato so fun to explore is the underground maze of tunnels and streets. Right now, we're coming down from the theater onto Miguel Higalgo Street. It's a subterranean street that pops out on the hillside for this short section before submerging into a tunnel again. See, the architecture down here looks much older than some of the buildings above. It almost looks like the city was built on two levels. This is because the mountains back in the day would use to flood the town. The canyon Guanajuato was built on was very steep. They solved this problem by building another city on top of the existing road system, turning this old part of the city into a network of tunnels, which historically would have carried all of the water, but now carries vehicle traffic. We near the south end of this street, you can see off to our left is where the tunnel goes underground again. Instead of following this route, we're going to pop into this kind of spooky looking corridor here, which is going to take us up the steps into another important square of town centered around the Templo de San Francisco. Again, kind of a spooky looking tunnel, but I think this is one of the charms that makes Guanajuato a really fun, interesting city to explore. All kinds of little tiny tunnels and alleyways that pop you up in different interesting parts of the city. This tunnel pops out right in front of the Templo de San Francisco, a Franciscan church that was started in 1741 and completed in 1792 during the height of Guanajuato's silver mining boom. This church is still in use today. And a very pretty interior if you happen to be here at a time when you're able to go inside the church. It's worth heading east from the square in front of the temple on Manuel Doblado Street. Just like a lot of the small squares sprinkled around Guanajuato, this one has a lot of cute little street vendors, craft fairs, and food stalls. Over here, I'd also recommend taking a slight detour, head south on Del Compañero Street. This is a really cute little painted alleyway, a little bridge up there with some musicians playing. That's the Santo Cafe. And as you continue down the alleyway, it's going to open up into another small little square. There's a couple more cafes. There's a mezcal bar off here on the right. And then as you look to your left, you're going to see a really cool statue of Don Quixote off there and that big rock formation. Now I'll take you through a quick tour of one of Guanajuato's more interesting museums. As you wander around the city, you've probably noticed a theme of Don Quixote everywhere. You see artwork sold in shops, statues, there's a museum here, and references to this fictional character are all over the city. If you're interested in learning the background of Guanajuato's interest in this character from the famous book by Miguel de Cervantes, I would recommend a stop by the Museo Iconográfico de Don Quixote, art museum dedicated to the artwork history of that same character. The link of Guanajuato to this fictional character is interesting and somewhat mysterious. The book was written by Miguel de Cervantes during Spain's colonial period in the early 17th century. However, the link to the book comes back to a Spanish refugee that immigrated to Mexico over 200 years later. Even if you're not interested in Don Quixote, this is a fun museum full of a lot of interesting, colorful artwork like these giant murals here on the stairwell walking up to the second floor. The museum itself is housed in a beautiful colonial open square building. So even if you don't appreciate the artwork, it's just interesting building to walk around and enjoy the space. Now back to the origin story. Fighting in the Spanish Civil War, Don Ferrer was inspired by a copy of Don Quixote while imprisoned in a French refugee camp. After finding his way to Mexico, he amassed a large collection of Don Quixote artwork, which he donated to the city in 1987, which now houses the largest collection of Don Quixote inspired artwork in the world. This last room on the second floor I found particularly interesting, housing a lot more small statues and Don Quixote inspired figurines. After finishing up in the museum, we're headed northwest down De Sopeña Street towards one of the most important squares in the church, which is in front of the Iglesia de San Diego. Kind of. Again, this street for me is very iconic of this city, just a really cute, easily walkable, narrow street lined with shops, restaurants, and cute little craft stalls. This is the church here off to our left on the major square, the Jardin de la Union off to the right. We'll be coming back here a little bit later in the day because this is where you're going to meet that Callejoneadas. It's going to take you around the city in the evening. And the funicular up to the top of the hill is also going to be just behind this square. Just take a quick stroll through the Jardin de la Union or Union Garden. A small square, tree-filled, surrounded by restaurants and shops right across from the San Diego Church. This is one of the prettiest squares in town, very iconic of central Mexican highlands. The colonial architecture is also really going to remind you of Western Europe. You could plop yourself down here and tell me you were in Madrid, and I wouldn't not believe you because it feels very Western European. This is one of the most well-known, most visited touristy squares in the city. West side of the square here is where all these restaurants are. These are going to be some of the more high-priced, fancy restaurants in town. However, the ambiance, I think, really makes up for the price because it's very pretty set. We're headed west now from the Jardin de la Union towards the Plaza de la Paz. These are the two busiest, crowdest, most well-known, popular squares in the city. So this small section of road here is going to be probably the busiest, most crowded, yet most interesting, packed with restaurants and small shops. Great for people watching in the whole town. And you'll notice in front of me this man dressed up in period piece outfit. He's one of the estudiantes who does the performances of the Callejoneadas later in the evening. You can buy a ticket from them. They're all over the place. You really can't not buy a ticket if you're looking for one. They're going to bother you constantly to buy a ticket. And I would definitely recommend doing this. However, don't feel pressured. You can buy one now or you can come by later. There's shows going constantly. You really don't need to feel pressure to buy a ticket in any particular time. We're now entering the main square of the town. This is the Plaza de la Paz, or Peace Plaza. Off to the right is the very iconic, much photographed church in town. This is the Basilica Colegiata de Nuestra Señora de Guanajuato. This is the church that comes up in almost every photo if you Google Guanajuato. It's located in the core of the town and emblematic of this beautiful colonial city. The basilica is older than some of the other churches that we've looked at so far. Started in 1671 and completed in 1696 in the Baroque and neoclassical style. This church has a lot of history and a very beautiful interior. The centerpiece, Nuestra Señora de Guanajuato, or Our Lady of Guanajuato, is a centerpiece statue of this church that dates back to a Moorish invasion of Spain in 741 AD. Now back outside in the Plaza de la Paz, Peace Plaza, heading west through this little park. Lots of cute little restaurants off on the left. Another great place for watching people. Remember I told you we'd circle back around. We're now walking behind the Teatro Juarez and the Iglesia de San Diego towards the funicular. That's going to take us up for some great views of the city, as well as a view of the Monumento of Pipila. We're now on the funicular headed up, and I'll just leave this here so you can see how great the views are and how worthwhile this trip is heading up the hill. Enter through the gift shop. There's a short walk through a couple of artisan markets, gift shops, and stores before reaching the top. There's a lot of steps, there's a lot of steep alleyways, a lot of walking in the city, which can be kind of rough if you're coming from a lower elevation. Remember, we're at almost 7,000 feet here in elevation. Past the vendors and food stalls, you come around to a large platform where you get an amazing view of downtown central Guanajuato. North, you can see off to the east the Teatro Juarez down there in the middle, a large yellow basilica in the main square, and the university behind it. And as we pan left, some of the buildings where we started the tour. This is the main statue, kind of the centerpiece of this monument here. This is the Monumento Pipila. I'll give you a short narration as we continue our journey back down the funicular. Pipila became famous during the Mexican Revolution when he burnt down the door of a granary in Guanajuato where the Spanish troops were barricaded in 1810. He used a large stone tablet as a shield, burned down the wooden door, allowing the Mexican insurgents to access the granary and the Spanish troops. We've covered most of Guanajuato Centro. Next, I want to show you a few places just outside the city, starting out with a very unusual, the Museo de Momias, or the Mummy Museum. We're coming up on the museum entrance here. It's not too horribly far away from downtown. However, I would encourage you to take a taxi here. It's not too expensive. Some of the streets going up here are pretty steep. It's kind of a hard, long walk, and the neighborhoods aren't going to be quite as nice as the ones in Centro. The origins of these mummies date back mainly from cholera outbreaks during the mid-1800s. A burial tax that, if not paid, caused many bodies to be disinterred and stored above ground, where the dry climate of central Mexico caused some of them to be mummified. If visiting this museum is right for you, consider that Mexicans honor their dead through traditional festivals such as Dia de los Muertos. If you don't share these same values, it may be a little off-putting seeing mummies so recently deceased in a casual display. Now we're heading south from the museum on Paseo Ashland. I wanted to show you a mural that links Guanajuato to a sister city in the United States, Ashland, Oregon. See the mural off in the distance. This commemorates an over 50-year anniversary between these two cities and signifies a relationship between the Universidad de Guanajuato and Southern Oregon University in Ashland. Interesting to see this mural because I've been to Ashland many times and recognize a lot of the paintings on here, including downtown Ashland. There's Lithia Park and Lithia Creek with a bridge, and the Shakespeare Festival off in the distance. And looking at the same mural on Paseo Ashland in Ashland, you'll see a lot of similar sites, but representing Guanajuato and stuff. As we're coming back into the Centro, there's one last place I wanted to show you that I think is a must-visit location in Guanajuato. This is the Mercado Higalgo, a white building off in the distance. It's an interesting, wide-ranging, and eclectic market and food stall. Originally built around the turn of the century, 1900s, this thing is so large it was originally intended to be a train station. However, in the early 20th century, this was abandoned and just turned into a larger market. Mostly organized into several sections. The ground floor is mostly food. The west side is going to be a lot of your fresh produce and fruits. And the east side of the downstairs is going to be a lot of markets and food. Fresh fish and meat stalls, and coming up ahead are all the food vendors where you're going to mostly find locals eating. Coming around upstairs so I can show you the second floor and kind of what the whole layout of the building looks like. Vendors mostly on the right, fresh produce and meat, transitioning over to the left. Second floor here, as I'm going to pan around and show you, is going to be mostly local crafts. You'll find a wide variety of pretty much everything from souvenirs, some mass-produced stuff, but as you wander around, there's also a lot of locally handmade products. The last thing to show you was a highlight of my trip to Guanajuato, and a must-do activity is touring the alleyways with the Callejoneadas. Known as the Estudiantina because this activity was traditionally performed by students from the university. As you can see, some members of our group are a little bit older. Callejon is Spanish for alleyways, so the group of musicians that performs in the alleyways of Guanajuato are also referred to as the Callejoneadas. This is a tradition that's taken place in Guanajuato since the late 1800s, usually starting at the Teatro Juarez and ending in the Alley of Kisses. Musicians that are dressed up in period outfits with traditional instruments will take you on a tour of the alleyways of the city. Surprisingly, the crowd tends to get rowdier as the night goes on because as you walk and follow the musicians, drinks are offered either in small clay pots around your neck or from clay glasses you can purchase from strategically located vendors located along the route. Musicians play a variety of songs ranging from serenades to waltzes as they relay the myths of the town and take you through the alleyways. I think it's helpful to know Spanish for this tour, but it's definitely not necessary as you will get just as much out of this experience, even without knowing most of the words to these songs, as I believe music is a universal language. Now we'll end the tour of Guanajuato as our group arrives at the Plaza de los Angeles, a beautiful local square located near our Airbnb. I hope you enjoyed this tour of this amazing city in central Mexico. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and again, thanks for watching.